Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video, and we have some very grave news to cover in today's video as far as the trajectory for a lot of major titles when it comes to gaming and their diminishing player base, and trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And if you want to make sure you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft and the gaming industry, then make sure to smash the subscribe button. Now, I found a few articles that we're going to be covering. The first one is here from The Gamer. Final Fantasy XIV is reportedly threatening to drop below 1 million active players, and Final Fantasy XIV has been one of the major competitors in the MMORPG space, and it can be used as a good measure as far as health for the genre. Is it growing? What is it innovating on? What is going on with it specifically? My kind of assessment for the MMORPG genre at the moment is that they are all buckets of water and they have a hole in them, and they're slowly leaking. The water is the player base, and they're slowly leaking players. And if there happen to be other problems like lack of content, punch another hole in that bucket. Bad balance, punch another hole in that bucket. Players having to wait around too long in order to get into content, punch another hole in that bucket, and the water just drains faster and faster. And the only way to refill that bucket is to add new content, release a patch, release an expansion. Obviously, there's going to be more water added on a new expansion, but inevitably over time, it seems like the drip is getting bigger and bigger year over year, as far as water and player base being drained out of the genre, and it's looking kind of grim. So, speaking about genres, the RTS genre, I saw Monte Cristo make this tweet talking about Stormgate, which was made from a bunch of StarCraft 2 developers, and showing some of the analytics for it, which is that there were 100 concurrent players playing 28 minutes ago and only 118 within the last 24 hours, with an all-time peak of 4,456 players. So this is why I'm very much so keeping my eyes on what's going on as far as genres are concerned, because much like the RTS genre, even if you're bringing on, some of the most OG developers that understood the formulas of those genres, sometimes it is an inescapable death spiral, especially when we compare that to something like, we want to say like World of Warcraft is a dead game, but we look at PvP, and in the last 24 hours there was 2,300 shuffle rounds played for solo shuffle. And when we look at Mythic Plus, there's still millions of keys being completed, although season 1 is significantly lower than Dragonflight season 1, and even Dragonflight season 3, which is begging the question, why is that happening? And that's why I think going over this article for Final Fantasy XIV is going to be really eye-opening and really important. So Final Fantasy XIV has seen a rather large drop in players between the release of Dawn Trail and patch 7.1. Lucky Boncho has claimed that over 1.4 million players are active during the release of Dawn Trail, though numbers currently sit at just 1.03 million. On that current trajectory, Final Fantasy XIV will likely fall below 1 million active players, with very little content getting more casual players to stick around. This seems to be the main focus point. Very little content that gets more casual players to stick around. I don't honestly know how you can get casual players to stick around, because from my viewpoint for casual players is that they are just going to follow the next hype train. They're going to follow the next trend. So if you're not keeping up with trends, not keeping up with hype, something else is going to compel them with FOMO. Like, oh, this new game comes out and there's a limited edition mount for the first week. I have to play that game. I have to get that mount. And even without them realizing the next time a new game comes out with the same thing, they're just going to abandon that game and never touch it again. And that limited mount really meant nothing other than to incentivize and get them to go into that game to spend a week before they move to the next one. So while I do think it is important to have content for casual players, I think that the casual players are also the most likely group of players that are just going to immediately flake on your game as soon as something else looks more hype, or is applying more predatory based kind of marketing strategies to try and take them from your game. Final Fantasy XIV is in a pretty odd spot at the moment. A lot of people are still kind of disappointed with the story. This is interesting. So another element of story being really critical. And when we think about World of Warcraft, Legion, Wrath of the Lich King, why were those expansions so notable? Why are they so positively, sought after in the past? Story. They were just really enriching stories. So MMORPGs, they need that. They need strong characters. They need strong narratives. They need good stories. That is the core of getting the mass masses in order to come into the game and come into the genre. And World of Warcraft with the War Within looked like it was setting it up itself pretty strong, and hopefully they're going to be able to deliver on it with patch 11.1 and moving forward for the rest of the Soul Saga, and obviously Chris Metzen coming back. So this could be a redeeming factor that definitely gives World of Warcraft at least some very good trajectory for the near future, or at least, you know, the next two expansions. Even after patch 7.1's attempt to try and spice things up a bit, and a lot of complaints right now are generally being leveled at the lack of things to do. New content like the World of Darkness Chaotic Raid and Echoes of Vana'diel Alliance Raid are pretty cool, with a level of difficulty that players find refreshing, but there aren't any long-term grinds that are really enticing more casual players to stick around. Now, some of the grinds that I think they've added into World of Warcraft, and I'm forgetting the name of the bug mount. He's like a giant spider beast, and he's like a really long rep grind that you got to go through in order to get him. And he's probably one of the most badass looking mounts that you can get in World of Warcraft. I think a lot of people were, hoping that he was the gladiator mount. And I forgot what his name is in Ashkahead. I'll pop up likely an image here in the VOD after this of that mount, but he's a really long grind, and that's something like that for casual players to have that goal to go after, I think is really important. I can remember when I was a really casual player back in TBC that I spent a lot of time rep farming in Nagrand, and I think it was killing ogres, collecting ogre beads, and turning those in to get the Talbook mount, because the Talbook mount was really cool. So having these types of grinds for cosmetics, I think specifically, so that you don't need to make your competitive players feel like they need to do any sort of boring grinds that are time consuming and take us away from the content that they're more interested in. Focus on enticing cosmetics that are likely going to lead players into wanting to go for those kind of fulfilling experiences that MMORPGs are known for. I don't have any experience on Final Fantasy XIV to know if they do or don't, but obviously, the reporter on this article would, and it seems like that is something that they are lacking, but definitely something that World of Warcraft should look at, making sure that they have with all of these patches, which I think they are. I mean, adding in the 4 cartels of the Steam Weedle, I think they're called, and the different rep factions that are associated with them, and the mounts and the pets that are coming through with them. I feel like they're giving a lot of really cool looking cosmetics to even the most casual audience members in the game. So I think World of Warcraft is likely doing this really well. They introduced delves, and that was intended for the casual audience as well. But like I said at the beginning of this article, the casual audience, as soon as the next hype train, their favorite content creator or whatever else is telling them that this is the thing everyone needs to be playing, they're kind of going to be the sheep audience that immediately goes to that next thing or the next FOMO, whatever it is. They're probably going to go out. So no matter how good you ultimately do this, if you've got some big competitor like Marvel Rivals or something like that, although I don't know how much overlap we see for Marvel Rivals and MMORPGs, you can see how quickly it just starts to suck everything out of all of the existing games and into this one. And I mean, justifiably so. It's a really good product. It deserves the success that it has, and it's going to force innovation in the industry amongst other games, and we're going to all receive better products as a result. So I think this is not necessarily like a bad thing that this is happening. It's definitely going to help innovate everything that somebody has managed to do this, but this is ultimately what's going on, I think, under the hood with all of this. Final Fantasy XIV is seeing a large player drop following Dawn Trail, so just continuing along those lines. In fact, there's so little to do right now that Final Fantasy XIV is experiencing quite a large drop in active players. A Japanese blog site called Lucky Bancho, shared by Reddit user ImpressiveWater287, that tracks player numbers for Final Fantasy XIV across various expansions and patches, has revealed that Dawn Trail actually lost a significant number of players between patch 7.0 and patch 7.1, whereas other expansions actually grew in players. I also wonder in the genre of MMORPGs is that we're all aging. I think the majority of the people that are playing in this genre, like, we're starting to push like late 20s, mid 30s, maybe even late 30s at this point. Let me know in the comments down below which age category you fit into, if you don't want to give the exact age, because I really think that we're all just aging. And as we age, I think we start hitting certain life points where it's like, I'm kind of done with games, or I don't have any time, my career, my kid, my family, whatever it is, that they start taking over, and you're just going to lose players even irregardless of what the actual content is of the MMORPG. I think one of the biggest things that MMORPGs really need to focus on is how can they get players into gameplay as fast as possible. Because if you've got to go into LFG and spend 10 hours finding a group and no one's inviting you because you're not playing the meta spec and blah, 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 long list of that, or you have long queue times for the content that you're going into, you're going to lose the players in that age category that have like an hour to get home to play something because they don't want to be in a queue or in an LFG process for the 1 hour that they have time to play. So if that is your majority audience is like late 20s to mid 30s like that, and they got family lives and limited time, they need to focus in. They need to hone in on reduce queue time, reduce the amount of time it takes to get in gameplay so that our players can actually play the parts of the game that they want to play with the limited time that they have, because otherwise we're going to lose these players to competitors that are getting their players into game. That is the number one thing that needs to be focused on. According to Lucky Boncho, over 1.4 million players are active upon the release of Dawn Trail, while just 1.1 were active upon the release of patch 7.1. In comparison, Shadowbringers and Endwalker had 943,000 and 1.3 million players upon each expansion's launch, which then rose to 1.2 and 1.7 upon the releases of patch 5.1 and 6.1 respectively. I also think, much like musicians and music, like beating your number one hit bestseller of all time, like back to back to back to back to back, is really hard to do. That is especially when you're a giant corporation with a huge team with all the bureaucracy, red tape going back and forth and everything to make sure that it all gets approved, is really tough to do. And maybe this is me giving too much lenience or something towards these companies, but being a musician myself, although not like a top record selling musician, I understand and respect the difficulty of art and creativity, and trying to outdo your best previous performance is not an easy task. So Final Fantasy could easily see an expansion in the future that they hit that nail in the head story, everything comes together and their numbers bounce right back up, and again, the leaky bucket, they just refill that bucket almost immediately. It's also claimed by Lucky Boncho that players are still dropping rather quickly after patch 7.1, with the active player count going from 1.15 million to about 1.03 million. On that current trajectory, Final Fantasy XIV seems poised to drop below 1 million active players for the first time in a good long while, which should be raising alarm bells for Square Enix, considering Final Fantasy XIV is the game that's propping up their entire company. Of course, the drop-off in players is always expected after a large expansion, but Dawn Trail's numbers are slightly worrying. It doesn't help that most of the content released after Dawn Trail has catered towards high-end raiders, with very little for more casual players to spend time on. This is a sentence that I see a lot, and I would really like to see the data on that. Like, how many of the changes are for the high-end difficulty content? How many of the changes and content are for the casual audience? Like, what is the actual numbers on this, so we can actually look at it and be like, no, this sentence is actually just wrong, or no, yeah, you guys are right on the money. They spent 80% of their development time only on the hardest raid difficulty, and they spent 20% time on the casual content, because I feel like there's no way. I feel like a lot of these companies, you'll see it go both ways. The high-end competitive players will say, no, they're focusing too much on the casual audience, and the casual audience will say, no, they're focusing too much on the high-end audience, and it's like, well, then which one is it? Which one is it? Or are we like, what is going on? Or is the dissatisfaction actually just mutual, and you're just trying to find someone to point the finger at to try and cover your bases with this? Because I've seen it go back and forth as far as this. It would be really nice to see that data, but we probably never will. That should change once the Relic Grind, Field Operation, and New Deep Dungeon are eventually released. But as it stands right now, Final Fantasy XIV isn't tempting players enough to stick around. I don't think, honestly, any game is tempting any players to stick around. I think like I've got a graph here for Supervive with the current players right now at 4,000, peak at 4,641, all-time peak at 50,000. This is like a battle royale League of Legends style game. It had a huge marketing package for about a week of time, like some of the best League of Legends commentators working on tournaments, biggest creators, and it just couldn't hold those players after that point. And it's just because there's so many competitors. There's so much competition. You have to make sure that you're hitting every single psychological tool and marketing tool available, while also having amazing and fundamentally amazing gameplay to back it up. Because if you don't, something else is just going to take those players away almost immediately. It is brutal right now. I think in the gaming space is absolutely brutal. But I wanted to share this news with you, share my thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on it? Like, what do you think is going on with the games right now that is leading you to switch games so frequently? What is it that's caused you to leave World of Warcraft if you've left World of Warcraft? Or what is World of Warcraft doing right that you're still sticking around and that you're still enjoying? Because obviously, main goal of this channel is I want to try and give you guys much information to enhance your experience on World of Warcraft as possible. But I got to keep an eye. I got to keep a pulse on things that are going on around everything else to try and see, like, is there something somebody else is doing that WoW could be doing? Or is there something else that a game has made a big mistake with that WoW should avoid as a pitfall, in order to try and make sure that its trajectory can still keep going for as long as possible with that leaking bucket, and keep refilling it as often as possible until we hopefully find a way to plug the hole, because otherwise, I don't want to end up like I don't want to end up like this. I don't want to end up like this, guys. We can't have this. This is danger zone, danger zone. But thank you guys very much for tuning into today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion, and I will see you in the next one.